Welcome into another edition of NBA Sound System Canada. Gil McGregor here, joined as always by my guy, Kyle Irving, KI. We're doing like a little bit of a bi-weekly thing right now, but that keeps more the storylines going. And just like last time, 2 weeks ago, you got the same headwear on, so I know you're feeling in a pretty good spot. How are you feeling though?
I'm feeling good. Yeah, this hat hasn't left my head since I got it for Christmas, and rightfully so. I mean, at this point, I think there's some good luck attached to it. Yeah, good looks. Yeah, feeling good. We're beating a backup quarterback away from going to the Super Bowl, so it's easier said than done. Going to be a good team. Going to be a good game, but I can't believe that we're even in this spot. So vibes are good. Vibes are high. Can't wait for Sunday, but excited to talk some hoops in the meantime right here.
That's what I was going to say. Things are going pretty well on the hoop side of things over in New England as well. Aside from the legal screens here and there, but you know, that's
illegal screen. Illegal screen.
Yeah. Illegal screen. That's neither here nor there. But yeah, plenty to talk about right now. We are, I guess, by the time you hear this, we'll be less than 2 weeks away from the trade deadline. There's been some trade news, but earlier this week, we learned about the NBA All-Stars, and there's a lot to talk about, take stock of, because we've crossed the official halfway point of the season. I was talking about this last night on one of a PHNX postgame, like why they call All-Star the midway point, because at that point, you're like 55 games into the season. But still, we've crossed the 41-game mark for a lot of teams, and a lot happened, and I think the standings look much different than we would have expected them to look as the season began, so we'll definitely get into that. But I guess we start with the All-Star starters because there's a lot to be said about that. I think we start in the Western Conference. Steph Curry, Luka Doncic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Jokic, and Victor Wembanyama. For those of you at home paying attention, that's 4 international guys in the year that there was going to be a team internationally All-Star. But also, for the first time since 2004, LeBron James is not an All-Star starter. We'll talk about whether or not he'll be in the game or not in a second. And then the Eastern Conference, you've got Giannis Antetokounmpo, your 5th international player, Jaylen Brown, much deserved, Jalen Brunson, Cade Cunningham, and Tyrese Maxey. I didn't really have any qualms about the All-Star starting lineups. Like, everybody there earned their spots. I think Luka Doncic was the leading vote getter, which that's that Lakers bonus you got going there. But obviously, he's also playing at a really high level, averaging 33 points a game this season. But first reactions, first thoughts about the All-Star starters for the 2026 All-Star game right in your backyard.
Yeah, I didn't think that there was any like egregious snubs. I know that, you know, Victor Wembanyama beat out Anthony Edwards on a tiebreaker because of the fan vote. So, you know, some people had an issue with that, but also his team is higher in the standings right now, and that's kind of how you get rewarded. Same thing that Donovan Mitchell said the night after the starters were announced, and he was asked if he was disappointed that he's not a starter. He's like, you know, obviously those are the goals that I'm trying to reach, but at the same time, like, teams that win get rewarded, and that is the reality when it comes to the All-Star game. So I didn't have any issues with the starting five on either side. I am curious, and you and I were just talking about this off air before we started, but like, we haven't really gotten any direction on how they're planning on shaping up the rest of the All-Star team. Like, we think that it's 7 more reserves from the East, 7 more reserves from the West, and they'll divvy it up from there. But we also aren't 100% sure. The NBA kind of just threw it at us that it's going to be 2 USA teams, 1 world team that are going to go head-to-head in the All-Star game, but didn't really go into any further depth of explaining what that's going to shape out like. You know, I know you and I had written down some potential guys that we thought could qualify for the All-Star game, but that also, you know, goes to say that, like, I wrote down like 10 names in the East and like 15 names in the West because it's that lopsided. And I'm even having a hard time picking 7 names in the Eastern Conference of guys who I feel like, you know, head and shoulders deserve it above other guys, especially some of the guys in the West. So without knowing how the rest of the All-Star roster is really going to unfold, we're kind of blindfolded right now as is.
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting, and maybe this is why they didn't tell us right away, because I think they kind of plan on making it up as they go. As funny as that sounds for, you know, one of the biggest sports leagues in the world, $1 billion corporation, it kind of feels like they're like, okay, well, we're going to do the 888. There are enough international stars in the league where they should be fine. But now you got Donovan Mitchell saying he wants to be looked at as a Panamanian player, not an American player. So, like, how does that impact things? Does that just, like, soften the blow? Because, like, you know, we talked about some of the international guys and the guys who didn't get included, like Denny Avdia, who you thought was basically a lock to get in there. Alperen Sengun dealt with some injuries, but another guy worth consideration given how well his team has played. You know, Cat, another guy who's represented the Dominican Republic internationally. Like, how do you treat him when you kind of get to the nitty gritty there? Dylan Brooks, you know, Jamal Murray, these guys as well who are having all-star caliber seasons. I know Dylan's struggled a little bit as of late, but I think that they will take stock of what is needed to make it work and what's the least confusing for us as fans or as people who cover the game, and both when we get there. So I think they kind of left it obscure for a reason. But that being said, let's just thinking about, generally speaking, I know you said you had some names written down. Like, we could probably start with a couple of the guys who are on the outside. You mentioned Anthony Edwards. I would consider him to be a lock to get there. He just had a big game last night, and they lost to the Utah Jazz. I was watching the end of that game for standings purposes. 10th straight game, Anthony Edwards against the Jazz with 30-plus points. Insert Michael Jordan joke here. But both of those guys have that in common, at least. They have a habit of being a pain in the side of the Utah Jazz. But also Keontae George had 45 in that game. So he won't get it this year, but definitely playing at an all-star level. But outside of those guys in the Western Conference, Denny Avdia, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard. I know I mentioned LeBron not starting. It would feel weird to not see him in an all-star game. So we started in the Western Conference. Another guy who wasn't in that top 10 voting results, I'm saying this, not even biased, but I watch him a lot. Devin Booker, playing on a team with a top 10 record in the NBA. They should have an all-star, so that's another guy I'll throw in there for the hat for the Western Conference all-stars. But who else did you have on that list of yours?
Yeah, I think Jamal Murray is someone, especially with the world aspect. We talked about this last time. Like, he has to be an all-star with the way that he's playing. He's been an absolute flamethrower, playing the best basketball of his career, and a major reason that Denver's been able to stay afloat with Jokic out. I would consider him a lock. Denny Avdia, like, same reason. It's like, I don't know how much they're really going. Like, are they going to just select the all-stars? And then, like you said, like, from that point, they kind of just like pander to like, oh, we need more world players. Well, all right, Donovan Mitchell, you can, represent Panama. Karl Anthony Towns, you can represent the Dominican Republic, and we'll move you over to the world team. Like, I have no idea how that's going to unfold. But like, Avdia to me is an all-star. Jamal Murray to me is an all-star. Like, what do you do with Kawhi and Harden? Like, Harden carried that team for the first half of the season, and then Kawhi's carried the first half of the first half, and then Kawhi's carried them for, the last like 20 or so games. Like, one of those guys has got to be an all-star. I do think, and I don't know if you feel the same way, like, LeBron James is going to get a legacy spot, right?
For sure.
There's no way that he's not going to be an all-star. And he's playing at an all-star caliber level. It's not like it would just be like completely size, really. Right. Yeah. It's not like, he would be like, it would be that egregious that he's an all-star and that it would only be because of who he is. Like, he is playing all-star caliber basketball, but like, I also agree with you, like, Devin Booker, like, should be an all-star lock. Like, that's a team that nobody expected to be as good as they have been all year. And he's been a major reason that, the Suns have been as good as they have been. And he, I feel like, hasn't gotten a ton of publicity for how well he's been playing, but like, when push comes to shove and you're going down the standings, like, that's a top 6 team in the West right now at the time of recording. Like, how would they not have an all-star? You know what I mean? So the West is going to be a hell of a lot more difficult to pick than the East, because, like I said, like, when I look at the East, like, Jalen Johnson, who's tailed off recently, but like played strong enough at the beginning of the season that I really feel like he's an all-star. Like, do the Magic get Paolo Banchero in just because of where they are in the standings? Like, are the Pistons going to get a second all-star with Jalen Duren just because they've been in first basically the entire first half of the season? I think Scotty Barnes is an all-star. Where does that leave Brandon Ingram? Michael Porter Jr. is someone to me that is like, yeah, they're not winning games, but he's having an incredible season and deserves to be in consideration. So, the East it's got slim pickings compared to the West. And that's where I'm like really curious if they go 7 more from the East, 7 more from the West, or kind of just pull everybody together, pick 24 more names and kind of go from there. Or sorry, 14 more names. 14 more names. And then kind of go from there. Yeah.
It's interesting too, because it feels like the backdrop to all the conversation we're having about guys that we are kind of mentioning is like how important winning is and how important winning should be. We said the same thing about Devin Booker. And, had we talked about this, when we talked about it 2 weeks ago a little bit, I would have pushed back against the Clippers, but they've gotten back on track. But I still think that by the time that the reserves are announced, they'll still be under 500. So it's hard to justify giving them 2. So then it's like, Kawhi, James, which one do you go with? But the Trailblazers are a team who, quite as is kept, as we're talking right now, are playing 500 basketball, and quite frankly, are a team that nobody would want to see in the play-in tournament just because of their perimeter defense and, having 2 guys who are playing at, 2 young up-and-comers in Shaedon Sharpe and Denny Avdia, and, the bigs they have. Like, they are a fun team. And to say that they're doing this all under an interim head coach when it feels like another lifetime when the scandal happened this season, but that's got to be crazy for a young team beginning of the year. Hey, your coach just got indicted by the feds. Figure it out. And for this team to be playing the way they did, that speaks to Jrue Holiday, Dame Lillard having good vets in the locker room and, putting their heads down and playing. I think that there is a pretty bright future in Portland with what they got going on. Like, Scoot Henderson hasn't even played, which is crazy as well to think about that part of it. So, they like, if any, you talk about, we'll get to Golden State in a little bit, but you talk about 2 timelines team, quiet as it's kept, Portland might have like the best example or one of the better examples of a 2 timelines team, but thinking about that as far as winning goes. But same thing, Michael Porter Jr. in the Eastern Conference, watched him play against the Suns earlier this week, and they did everything to kind of keep him at bay, and he still found ways to get his. He's playing at a really high level. The Pistons, I think, again, they've won at such a high level. Jalen Duren is really good, right? Like thinking about the way he's grown offensively, the way he's grown as a playmaker, things he's been doing there. That's a really fun team as well. So it's interesting to kind of start thinking about like, how this goes with these teams who are been at the top of their conferences, even the Spurs, right? Like I don't think that they have a second all-star, but hey, this team has been so good. Like they're one of the few teams in the league with 30 wins right now. You have to at least think about, what Fox has done, what Castle's doing. That's got to be the first ever N1 windmill in league history, by the way. Like,
yeah, that was crazy.
What made him, what possessed him to do that in the first place? But yeah, I'm just curious because like, yeah, at the end of the day, it's your individual production and where do you stand amongst your peers relative to, the guys at your position, but also are you doing this and is it leading to wins and things like that? So that's got to be a little bit of part of the equation that's gotten more complicated with the USA World stuff. The
thing that's tough too is that like, and I feel like I've heard, like, I think like Jeff Teague talks about this on his podcast at one point, but like there are like once you've been an all-star a certain amount of times, it almost kind of feels like you keep just getting invited back to the game. And it's like almost unfortunate that it works out that way sometimes because like, and I'm not saying that he doesn't deserve it, but like someone like Joel Embiid, for example, like he's been awesome when he's played this season. He hasn't played that much. Like, is he contributing to winning more than Michael Porter Jr.? Yes, he is. The Sixers have a better record and they play well when he's in the lineup. But like, I also feel like players like MPJ should really be rewarded for having like these one-off individual seasons that he's playing really, really well, even though his team's record doesn't represent that. So it kind of puts, like I would imagine, puts the coaches in a tough spot when they're trying to pick the reserves of like, all right, yeah, Joel Embiid is a multi-time all-star. He's a guy that's always in the game when he's healthy and available. But, like, is he having a more impactful season individually than Michael Porter Jr. is? Like, I'm not sure I could confidently say yes. And then, like, I even think about somebody like Josh Giddey. Like, he was awesome at the start of the season. He gets hurt. The Bulls kind of fall off. Like, is he still in consideration? Like, probably not, but, like, probably should be. I don't know. It's just and then, like, I think about someone like Pascal Siakam as well. Like, he's had an incredible season all year, right, but, like, for nothing because they've been in dead last in the East the entire first half of the season. And, he obviously has the international side to him, too, where maybe that's a way that he gets in for the Eastern Conference if that's how they decide to divvy it up. So, these are all like very loose hypotheticals without actually knowing how they're going to do the rest of the voting. Again, like Gil and I think that it's 7 East, 7 West, and they'll make the USA and world teams after that. But I also do wonder, or like it is a little curious that when they announced 10 starters, it just so happened to be 5 USA players, 5 world players. Like, were coaches and media given any sort of direction in terms of that? Like, hey, maybe throw an extra international player on the ballot to balance out these teams a little bit. I really don't know. They didn't announce it, so we don't know. We can only guess and assume, but that's kind of where we're left. For sure. And circling back a little bit too with some other teams I want to talk about as far as like whether they should have an all-star or like just a conversation with it. One, the Thunder, right? Is Chet a guy like his team is, was on a historic pace and still basically on a historic pace. It might look weird if they only have one, and I know, J-Dub is back out of the lineup with the hamstring this time. But Chet is he the guy or is it just, kind of Shea? And, just as the guy again, I know last year J-Dub was able to go, but a little bit different circumstances this year. And then swinging it back to the Eastern Conference, the Heat have been kind of back to, where they are again. I know somebody screenshotted the standings and it was
Chicago, Miami, and Cleveland. I mean, Chicago, Miami, and Atlanta, right there, 8 through 10 again. They said, I appreciate these teams' commitment to the bid because here it is again, just like the Champions Classic in college basketball. You're going to get those 3 teams around there in the play-in tournament range. But thinking about Bam, Norm, is Norm an All-Star this year? Because we were having this conversation about him last year, and he's playing really well again this year. And circling back to what you said about the Raptors as well. They probably only get one, but I think similar to, they remind me a lot of what the Suns are doing in the Western Conference, a team that nobody really knew what to make of the Raptors, and people wrote them off and did not think that they were going to be capable of anything of substance this year because they weren't sure how it was going to work. We, about this time last year when the Brandon Ingram trade went down, I don't think that we would have predicted them drafting Colin Murray-Boyles and things looking the way that it did, but this is a team that, look at it right now as we talk, they're a game and a half out of second in the Eastern Conference, 45 games in. I don't think anybody would have predicted that. So, is it BI? Is it Scotty? I know BI was in the top 10 of the votes, but if you watch him play a lot, Scotty's kind of the straw that stirs the drink. So, thinking about those examples of teams is going to be very interesting how that plays. And then if it's Norm, does Norm represent Jamaica internationally? Because he's going to play for them internationally. And so, there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes in this, which, again, they're figuring it out as they go. And so are we.
I think that the end result is going to just piss people off no matter what, right?
Probably.
Because guys are going to get snubbed and they're going to point the fingers of oh, well, did this player only get in for the USA versus world aspect of it? Especially because they didn't give any firm criteria going into it. And I completely agree with you. I think they're almost just making it up on the fly. I think it's only going to come back to bite them in terms of how mad fans are going to be when their favorite player doesn't get voted in, or, a team that is below another team in the standings gets 2 All-Stars when they only get 1. It's only going to cause more controversy in discourse around the All-Star rosters, which at the same time isn't necessarily a bad thing for the league. You know what I mean? That is, it's engagement. And that's also, I think, honestly, people enjoy arguing and debating the snubs more than they do the guys that actually made the team every year anyway. But to address one thing that you mentioned specifically, I don't see how Chet Holmgren isn't an All-Star, given that they've had the best record in the league all year. He's the favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year right now, just because, Victor Wembanyama's availability. I think he can only miss a couple more games before he's ineligible to win the award. And even though his numbers aren't all that flashy, he's averaging, I think it's 17 and 8 or something like that with 2 blocks. He is the most important person on that entire team's defense for one of the best defenses in the NBA. So I don't see how Chet Holmgren wouldn't be an All-Star, how they wouldn't get a second All-Star. And that's kind of the same thing that I was talking about with Jalen Duren. It's Pistons have been in first place in the East basically the entire season. How do they only get 1 All-Star when they have another player that is playing All-Star caliber basketball? So yeah, it's, to kind of talk in circles, without knowing the criteria, I think we are just going to see people get really upset about how this turns out. And you and I will be here to break it all down on who got snubbed and who didn't. And, talk about the storylines of who's the most pissed off, what fan base is the most pissed off because their team didn't get a second All-Star or didn't get a All-Star.
I'm laughing because you and I talking and saying the word criteria over and over again. I just thought about that Isaiah Thomas clip. I met the criteria, but I was not selected from Last Dance. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of snubs talking about that as far as that goes. Now, one guy who probably won't be an All-Star this year who has been in the news, I guess we could shift going forward that way. And I went back to look at the clip last year. We're about a year removed from the Luka Doncic trade. And remember you asked me, who was the player that I could see getting moved out of nowhere? Well, this won't be out of nowhere because there have been some reporting around it, but there has been some reporting that Ja Morant's time in Memphis could be nearing an end. He said, look, I got the Grizzlies logo tatted on my back. You know where I want to be. But him wanting to be there is different from the front office feeling that same way. He had a great game overseas in London after missing some time, did not play in Berlin, but did play in London and was the best player on the floor. And now it's just a very interesting situation. As we record this right now, the Grizzlies are outside looking in, playing tournament range. They've been passed up by the Clippers, but they're 18-23 right now. It's a mess, man. It's a mess. It's to think that where this team was, with 2 seed was at 2023. Right? That was the year I came out there to LA for the first time when they were the 2 seed in the Western Conference, and things have just, become what they've become from this day on. And I guess they were the 2 seed back-to-back years. So it's an interesting thing, an interesting situation with the Grizzlies. What do you make of Ja's situation? Do you think he will still be in a Grizzlies uniform after the deadline?
I wonder, like, how much of, yes, he has the Grizzlies logo tatted on his back, but like, I don't know, how much is he trying to almost like flip the script and make it seem like the franchise wants to get rid of him versus like, you know, him wanting to be out? I just think that like we're in a unique spot, specifically this year's trade deadline. Like it feels like we've been in situations like this before, right? Where like, you know, like I think of like that Nets team and like Kyrie didn't want to be there anymore. KD didn't want to be there anymore. They both kind of like not necessarily demanded a trade, but it kind of suggested that neither of them wanted to be there anymore. And they traded them both at the same deadline. Like I think we're in a unique situation with three different tiers of players with Giannis that it almost feels like it would be better if like they just went separate ways and started fresh. The Grizzlies with Ja Morant, and then you know, a couple tiers below that, the Warriors situation with Jonathan Kuminga. And we have these three players, which was like bar of the century from Mike Dunleavy. And if you didn't hear that, Gil is referencing Warriors GM Mike Dunleavy had a press conference after Jimmy Butler tore his ACL, and someone asked him about the Jonathan Kuminga trade demand, and he said, in order for there to be a demand, there has to be a demand on the market. Basically saying we've tried to trade him, nobody wants him. You know, putting it the most polite way possible that he could have. But you know, I think Ja Morant is a similar situation, right? Like, you know, that news broke that him and Memphis were both open to parting ways a couple weeks ago, or I think it was last week. And you know, it doesn't really seem like there's a lot of suitors out there. Like, you know, people kind of connected the dots with Miami because they've been trying to land a superstar, but now it sounds like they're keeping their books clear for if Giannis potentially becomes available this offseason. And like, you know, Ja hasn't been playing his best basketball. I think I brought it up last week, or maybe it was the pod before that, but like, it's like 6 years in a row now, 6 seasons in a row that he's decreased in points per game. You know, he's not getting better. He's getting worse, at least like statistically, in his ability to stay on the court, or inability to stay on the court, I should say. So he's not someone whose trade value is sky high right now, or even as high as it would have been 3-4 years ago. You know, like you said, when they were a 2 seed in the Western Conference and he was fine in the West. So like, it just feels like there are a lot of one-way kind of trade requests, trade situations going into this deadline where players want out, but teams don't want those players in return. And, you know, that obviously goes more for Ja and Kuminga than it does if Giannis became available. I think a lot of teams would, you know, kind of throw the kitchen sink at Milwaukee to do whatever they could to get him. But it doesn't really feel like we have two to tango on a lot of these trade fronts this deadline as it comes up 2 weeks away from now. So curious to see how that plays out as well, because as we know, you need you need both sides to be down to make a trade. And if only one side's down to make it, I don't know how these players end up going anywhere.
That's the interesting thing too, because when I know last time we talked about Trey, and we were on the verge of it becoming official, and it became official basically hours after you and I talked about it. And I remember the conversation league-wide was that, hey, this is the first domino. Once this deal gets done, teams are going to exhale a little bit and start making moves. But like you mentioned, this Buck situation being in flux, and Giannis, I think, being too loyal to just kind of like say, hey, I want out. And the Bucks being like, well, we're not going to move you unless you say that. It's not benefiting anybody. And it's just dragging out the situation of like, you know, who's going to kind of budge first to just end this. But that is kind of something everybody seems like they're like holding their breath for that to happen. But on the flip side, that's a big domino, because I think if and when the Bucks do move him, then it is just they just fire sale. Everybody's gone. Like at that point, you have to try to recoup as much as you can because of the capital they parted ways with to get Drew Holiday. You know, to make all these other things happen. You know, they set themselves back, which is what you're supposed to do. They have a championship to show for it, but now you don't really talk about the other side of it when you get to this point where it's like, okay, well, how does it end? A lot of times it doesn't end as beautiful as it is when it's at its peak. So thinking about that, and Ja also, it reminds you of the Trey thing. But like, you know, when you think through the league, and you mentioned Miami, but you know they're holding out, and there was a talk about Minnesota because they could maybe use a point guard, but I think that there was like, you know, how will we even make this work? There's been talk about New Orleans, but that would be a massive like buy low spot, buy low situation. You're hard pressed to think, because the places that aren't very good and could maybe do it have young guys at that position that they are going to like take away from. And the more I think about it, it's just not really anything that makes much sense for Ja Morant as of right now. And, what we learned in the past, sometimes it doesn't have to make sense, but I just don't know. Like, again, the demand, the market, it's just not a team out there, given this version of where he's at right now, saying we could use this guy to take ourselves to another level.
Yeah, big time. I think that's the biggest part, like for both him and Kuminga. Like neither of those players are good enough for contenders to say, hey, we're Ja Morant or Jonathan Kuminga away from competing for a title. In teams that are at the bottom of the standings aren't really in a position to like they're not, neither of those guys are playing high enough caliber basketball at this point right now for them to say, okay, well, like if we were to trade for this guy, that gives us a building block to, kind of move the franchise forward.
Maybe the Kings, maybe
the Kings are like the weirdest team in the league as it is, though. Like they just have like, they're the most like 2K franchise of all time of just like, let's just get a bunch of names together and see how it works. And it's not working. So, I mean, they could try and switch things up. And maybe if they decide like, all right, ja Morant is someone our fan base can be excited about. And if we could, trade Zach LaVine and maybe another contract to make it work or whatever it has to be, like it might give them more direction than they have right now, which doesn't seem like much of a direction. But like, I think the biggest thing for like Memphis and like Milwaukee specifically, and like Golden State, especially with Jimmy Butler out now, like to an extent, like their ceiling is capped. Golden State's is. Milwaukee is not a good basketball team right now. Like, let's just call a spade a spade. Like, yes, Giannis missed time, but they're 6 games under 500. Like, they haven't been competitive against good teams, like basically all season. And Memphis, like you said, is kind of just a mess. So it's like those teams I would think would be not the Bucks, obviously. They're separate because Giannis is Giannis. But like Memphis, like I would almost think should be willing to like sell a little bit lower on Ja Morant. If it helps speed up their timeline in any way, shape, or form. It's just, it doesn't seem picks. Like right. But I think the problem is it doesn't sound like Ja's going to like, turn into any sort of future assets or draft capital the same way that Trae Young did. So like they kind of have their hands tied. Like, it's this guy does or doesn't want out. Maybe you want him out. Maybe he wants to be out. Who knows, like who wants out more, but like, they're not going to get the capital and future assets in return that they want. So it sounds like, they're kind of just going to be sitting on their hands until someone says, you know what, I will take it. I will take a shot on Ja Morant. I will roll the dice here.
I was going to say, it sounds crazy. My last thought on that, when I mentioned the picks, it's going to be weird if they move him that he goes for none or however many fewer than Desmond Bane went for. But you kind of almost have to look at it as 2 separate deals and say, well, we got this many picks, period. And then, Ja Morant, did what it did and we got such and such players in return. But then it's building around Cedric Coward and Zach. The Grizzlies are an interesting team because I really do think that they have a knack for picking the right guys and developing talent in that franchise. You talk about, Cedric Coward, that great pick. Zach Edey ended up being more than a lot of people expected him to be at the NBA level. They just can't stay healthy. Scottie Pippen Jr., another guy who was a fringe NBA player until he wasn't. And now he's a guy who you could probably trust when healthy. But it's just so many guys with the caveat of like when they're healthy, they can figure that stuff out now. Shifting as far as that goes, I was thinking about something as far as like chemistry goes, and we can probably close with that talking about trades. But the Jonathan Kuminga situation got a lot more interesting this week. Jimmy Butler went down with a torn ACL. Unfortunately, the injury was as bad as it looked in the moment. He's obviously out for the remainder of the season and beyond. He's not as young as he once was, so it makes it a little more interesting as far as the big picture goes with the Warriors and the investment they made in him. And Jonathan Kuminga comes out the first game after a bunch of DNPs, and again, the talent speaks for itself, 20 points, and a blowout loss to the Raptors. But I'm curious now that what this injury means for the Warriors, and they were, keeping pace with the top 6 teams in the Western Conference, trying to push out of that play-in tournament range, what it means for Steph Curry and his temperament, what it means for Jonathan Kuminga's trade value, market, or if the Warriors, like, we have to keep this guy and figure it out. But that happening is, you never want anybody to get injured, and you never really think in the worst case scenario. But now it's opened a box of so many what ifs as far as where the Warriors are now, the next 2 weeks before the trade deadline, and the big picture in the future too.
Yeah, I would love to. I don't know how they would make it happen. I would love to see them make the Michael Porter Jr. swing. Like, I feel like he is someone who, like, you and I have talked about him on this pod before. Like, he went from being the truth in high school. Like he was like the surefire number one prospect, 5-star, all that, like everything he was supposed to be, and looked like he was in a world of future Kevin Durant, like was the future Kevin Durant. And then the back injury happens and never seemed to be able to like get anything on track going into the NBA. And then he falls out of the lottery because of the back injuries and everything like that. Fills a role for Denver perfectly as just basically a 3-point sniper playing off of Jokic, gets himself a title, and now finally has an opportunity to be the guy on a team. And he's proving that he's capable of doing that. Now, if he were to go to Golden State and fill Jimmy Butler's shoes, like I would think that would get really interesting, because now he would be playing more similar to the role that he played in Brooklyn, or is playing in Brooklyn, than it would be the one that he played in Denver. And I would like to see what that looks like alongside Stephen Curry as two of the most prolific 3-point shooters in the league. Now, with that being said, like what do the Warriors have that the Nets want? The answer is not much. And like they haven't been playing Kuminga, I would assume, not because he can't help the team, but I would assume because they know that like it's heading towards a divorce and you don't want to risk him getting injured and then not being, or being even less valuable than he's already being perceived on the trade market. But then you put him in the game last night and it's like, yes, it was a lot of it in garbage time. And you know what? He actually kind of pulled them back into that game a little bit to make it a little interesting. But like the talent is still there. He's still a capable player, like in a different situation. And I'm still holding my Jonathan Kuminga stock. So like I
respect
I say
that.
This. I say this.
A lot of people are willing to sell it to you too.
Yeah, exactly. I'm still going to hold on to it for a little bit until, I'm going to at least give him a chance to go to a different team and try and let it play itself out. But like, he still has talent. He's still someone that I think could help. I don't think he's going to be a player that you build around to try and make a championship team, but he can be a role player on a championship team, I would think. Like, and now they have an opportunity to try and showcase that. But their hands are kind of tied because everybody in the league knows that he wants out and they want him out. So like, they're not like really, the Warriors have no leverage. And if the Nets don't want him, then what else could they trade aside from Jimmy Butler's injured contract, which Mike Dunleavy also said that he doesn't envision the Warriors doing that. I don't know how they would even, kind of massage their roster and cap situation into getting a rotation caliber player that could bring them back to a championship caliber team this year. So yeah, their hands are tied for the time being. And Steph Curry is not getting any younger. So you don't want to just like punt the rest of the season. They'll still be a playoff team, even if they were to play this thing out, I would think. But I don't know if there's any big swing at the deadline out there for them to replace a Jimmy Butler caliber player and get them back into contention for one of the best teams contending for a title in the West.
I mean, shoot, we just saw a report today that Jeannie Buss doesn't like LeBron anymore. So maybe that's just what a crazy. It's kind of like, it was like not even the main part of the story, but it's like, yeah, she's a
TMZ article.
I know, seriously. It's like, man, she got tired of him and all this stuff, and he should have been more grateful that they drafted Bronny. It's like, well, if there's any time now, cold game, I could see, if they're ready for that, but I doubt I don't know why the Lakers would want Jimmy Butler's contract of him coming off of that, but who knows? Maybe they're that tired of it as far as that goes. But yeah, you're right. I think it'll be very interesting to see because, I mean, ultimately they got a lot less scarier. We talk so much about playoff Jimmy, play-in tournament Jimmy, and the fact that he would be next to Steph Curry. And I also think that the Warriors in some ways were able to hide behind the what if of last year. They could easily say, hey, if Steph doesn't get injured, we're probably beating Timberwolves. When we get past them, who knows what happens, against OKC. I don't think they would beat them, but they could point back to that injury and kind of look at that as the reason why things didn't pan out. As you mentioned, Steph's going to be 38 in a couple weeks here, right? So like he's not nearly as young as he once was, still playing at an all-star, all-NBA level. He's Steph Curry. He's going to be Steph Curry until the day he decides to unlace whatever sneakers are on his feet. Last night he's warming up in Roger Federer kicks, literal tennis shoes. But that makes it really interesting. I know people are saying that like maybe he goes somewhere else. I don't see it happening, but there are a lot of things, weirder things that have happened, things that we've never seen have happened before. Again, I don't think it'll happen, but they've put themselves, just as we talked about the Trailblazers doing such a great job of the two timelines, almost kind of tripping into it, kind of like, falling backwards into it. The Warriors had these golden opportunities and no pun intended, but who would have known that, the James Wiseman and Jonathan Kuminga draft like would have panned out, or Moody or all those guys. And Moody has turned out to be a solid rotational player, but the lottery picks that they had, we thought one of those guys is going to just kind of be able to be the star that kind of takes the baton from Steph. And obviously that's massive shoes to fill, but there could have been ways they maybe could have gotten, a less flashy name, but, a higher floor type guy. And I know the 2020 draft is difficult. I was looking at it the other day, and, not to call this guy out, but I'm sure the Pelicans are regretting taking Kyrie Lewis Jr. 8 picks before Tyrese Maxey. But it was really hard to, identify talent that year in 2020. So they got an unfair shake as far as that goes as well. But here they are at the end of the day. They won 4 championships. I'm not going to feel sorry for them or bad for them. But, you just hope to see Steph Curry, in this in some type of terms and at least get to go down swinging, because, Steph and Jimmy would have been really scary for anybody in a Game 7-like situation. I don't think they'll fall beyond 10, especially knowing that it's the Grizzlies on the other side of it, but things got a lot more interesting with the Warriors.
Yeah, I think the big thing with like the two, like we've been talking about the Warriors 2 timelines for it feels like 5 seasons now, and it's like the thing that's like often forgot is that like that 2022 championship did basically come while they were trying to mesh the 2 timelines. So it's like it wasn't all for nothing, You know
what too? Jordan Poole was a big part of it,
and Andrew Wiggins. Like, you know what I mean? Like these guys that like you almost forget they even played for the Warriors. And then Andrew Wiggins goes back last night and he's getting a crazy standing ovation, rightfully deserved. It probably could have been in the running for Finals MVP if Steph didn't already didn't have one on his trophy case at that point. But I the last thing I want to say on this, and it kind of made me laugh because like what else is he supposed to say? But like last night, Steve Kerr talking about where they go from here without Jimmy Butler. He's like, well, this year we feel better. We feel like we're in a better position than we were before the Jimmy Butler trade last year because we have DeAnthony Melton, Will Richard, and Al Horford. And in my head, I'm like, that can't be the answer for the Warriors front office. Like yes, you have to say whatever you like. You have to say something to make people try and feel better. But like, there's no way that Warriors fans heard Steve Kerr say that like, oh no, we're all good because we have DeAnthony Melton healthy. Will Richard is playing better than anyone would have expected. And we have, 100-year-old Al Horford, with all due respect, Al. So there's got to be a move that's made. I don't think that they're just going to sit on their hands and, kind of waste a second half of, whatever Steph Curry has left of this season and the rest of his career. So I'm curious to see what the moves are going to be there. I just think that the trade market in general right now, it feels like we're getting the same recycled storylines. Like it's like Anthony Davis, but now he has the hand injury. Is Giannis going to get traded? Is he not? Like, is Ja Morant going to get traded? Is he not? Like, there are a couple names that continue to be floated around, like Michael Porter Jr., but it's like no one really seems to have the assets in return that Brooklyn would want, to trade MPJ. So we're either going to get no movement at all, or there's going to be some shocking moves at the deadline in 2 weeks that no one ever really saw coming. And I think, like you said, a lot of people are waiting to see if that Giannis domino falls. I don't think it will during the season. So teams are going to have to pivot pretty quickly, and hopefully that creates some chaos at the deadline because, that's what you and I and other NBA fans and people who cover the game love to see around this time of year.
Yeah, I was going to say, to put a bow on the trade talk, it feels like a lot of people have players they're interested in, and there are a lot of players who teams are probably willing to part with. But the third part of it, people ain't willing to pay up. So what it takes to get somebody, I think there would be the potential of buyer's remorse is keeping people kind of timid right now. We're like, oh man, if I give up these assets to acquire, say, a Trey Murphy III, what if somebody that I want a little more than Trey Murphy III becomes available and I gave up those things for Trey Murphy III, and the team that I want to do dealings with has no interest in him? You're kind of stuck. So talk about those dominoes. It does feel very interesting that is kind of where we are right now. As we wrap up here, I'm going to talk about another team. We just talked about the Warriors. Let's talk about a former Warriors assistant and Mike Brown, the New York Knicks. Are going through it a little bit. How concerned are you about them? I know it's New York. It's their media market tends to overreact, but in this specific case, I don't think that this is an overreaction to what's going on and what's going wrong in the Big Apple.
I want to know if like any of the Karl Anthony Towns smoke has any fire behind it. Like are they actually shopping him behind the scenes? I don't really think so. I'd be shocked if they were.
Well,
because like another in-season pivot like that in a year that they are supposed to, I mean, they were favorites to win the East, or second favorites after Cleveland, but with the way the Cleveland's played this year, like, I mean, I picked them to win the East at the beginning of the year. I'm not feeling as good about that pick as I did earlier in the season and after they won the NBA Cup. Like, all of a sudden, things aren't clicking in New York. It feels like they have some serious shortcomings, especially defensively. They've been one of the worst defensive teams in the league over the last month. They've lost, 9 out of their last 11 games. Yep. Having players-only meetings, those never happen when things are going well. I still believe in I still believe in the core of like Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, Karl-Anthony Towns in this year's Eastern Conference can at least get you out of the first round. And if you can get that far, then, you can make it to the NBA Finals. But things aren't pretty in New York right now. It would be pretty shocking to me if they hit the panic button the way that, some of the reports were coming out after that loss the other night of like, oh, they've been, secretly shopping Karl-Anthony Towns. I would be completely, and maybe that is the shocking move, that like the shocking pivot that all of a sudden, like, oh, Giannis isn't available. Well, behind the scenes, Cat's been available. Like, maybe that's the shocking move at the deadline that we never saw coming. But otherwise, like, I think they're kind of stuck with what they got, and they got to find a way to get through whatever this rut is, because they are a team that has a ton of expectations in a market that does not take expectations lightly, and they are falling way short of those so far.
It all goes back to, I don't know, was it late May, June, when you fired Tom Thibodeau after getting within 2 wins of the finals? You made it very clear that anything less than the finals was going to be unacceptable. And there have been teams that have lost, I don't necessarily say 9 out of 11 games in a season, but there have been teams who have gone into slumps and gotten it together. I mean, hell, the Pacers stunk through 30 games last year, right? This is a little bit later in the season, and the Knicks showed more promise before this stretch, but a bad stretch doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't going to reach the goals that have been placed upon you. But this team came into the season facing a ton of pressure, and there was never, and especially once they established kind of who they were. And I know the injuries, Jalen Brunson going down, Josh Hart going down, guys being in and out of the lineup has impacted this most recent slump or stretch of games. But it's bad, man. Like, at first when, because they played the Suns twice in a span of 8 days, and the first loss was in Phoenix. I didn't think too much of it. People were kind of freaking out. And even going into the game in New York, which was over the weekend, I didn't think too much of it. I thought they ran to a better team and they weren't at full strength. Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart didn't play. But then getting smoked like that at home on a holiday in front of a national TV audience against the Dallas Mavericks, that's not good. That's not good.
Not a team that was playing good basketball either. Like, the Mavs have, I mean, they've been all right, but they're not playing good basketball. You get blown out like that at home, ugly.
That's terrible. It's terrible. So, and the boos ringing down on them, and James Dolan leaving his seat courtside and not returning to it. There's a lot of stuff around them that gets magnified again because it's the Knicks. But all it comes down to, and it's a good way to wrap it up here, the 2 teams I follow closest, honestly, even 3 teams I follow closest, and enter the season without expectations and seeing how much fun it is, as far as the Suns playing much better than what was expected, and the Raptors playing much better than what was expected. And hell, the Hornets are playing much better. The Celtics are playing much better than what was expected of them. These 4 teams, right, that we are probably most familiar with than all these other teams. When you don't really have those expectations, the players are playing freer, and there isn't so much like life or death with every single slump or every single win streak. It's just kind of enjoying the moment, enjoying the process. So I'll close it with that as far as that goes, because we are at the midway point. I know we talked about some of the stuff in the midway point of the season. I know not the Hornets, but of any of the 3 teams I named, would you say that one of those teams are the biggest surprise of the season so far?
I'd say Phoenix is up there. Like, Phoenix, that's a team that, I mean, what was their, do you know off the top of their head what their over-under win total was at the beginning of the year?
31.5.
I was gonna guess 32. So that's telling you that I probably spent a little too much time looking at that type of stuff. But they're 4 games away from hitting that right now, or 5 games away from hitting that right now. I would say the Suns are up there for the bit. Yeah, like, I mean, listen, it's crazy that the Celtics are in second place, but also, like, when you look at the roster, like, I don't know, it almost makes you feel like maybe it was an overreaction of like people thought they could have been one of the bottom teams in the league this year. Like, you still have Jaylen Brown, you still have Derek White, you still have a lot of the core. Like, it makes, I would not have guessed they're in second place, but I'm not as shocked that they are in the top 6 in the East as I am that Phoenix is in the top 6 in the West. They've really shocked me. Like, obviously Toronto's playing really well, but that's another team that, like, you had the talent on the roster. Like, the talent was there. We talked about it in the preseason. We talked leading into the season that, like, yes, they were a team that you weren't really sure what you could make of them, but like the talent on the roster was, they were capable enough of being where they are in the standings at this point. Where Phoenix, like, I don't think that anybody would have looked at that roster. And especially when you add the fact that Jalen Green has hardly played. I don't think
3 games in the first 44.
Right, exactly. Like, I don't think anybody would have guessed that this is a team that has a better record than the Timberwolves, or same record as the Timberwolves, same record or same win percentage as the Lakers, higher in the standings than the Warriors over the halfway point of the season, with Jalen Green only playing a couple games. Like, I would say that's, I know that's close to home for you right now, and you do a whole lot of talking about the Suns, day to day, but like, they're the most shocking team in the NBA to me so far this season.
Yeah, I was kind of asking you because, I see it every day now. And, for me, it's not like when I came into it, obviously they started season 1-4 also. That's the other part of it too. They lost 4 of their first 5 games. So you could say since then they're 26-13 after like a pretty bad start to the season. But, that 1-4 start was around the time where I was getting ready to come out here. And I was like, man, this might be a long year. But, you start watching closely. It's like there's something here. And they know how to play and they know how to win in different ways. And they're really well coached, and they're getting, stuff from like Colin Gillespie. If it weren't for Nickeil Alexander-Walker, is probably your most improved player in the league. Jordan Goodwin, a guy who bounced around from team to team to team, has had a stint here before, finally comes back and has carved his lane as being one of the grittiest players in the NBA. And obviously we talked about it already, Devin Booker's all-star case. I think, short to say, he deserves it to put up with what he put up with the past 2 seasons, the experiment that failed, and him, saying, look, I'm pledging to this team. I'm going to sign an extension with this franchise. I'm going to have a hand and a say in who they pick as a coach. And then people saying, who is Jordan Knott? And Jordan Knott just putting his head down and working as well. It is definitely a surprise because on paper, circumstantially, it shouldn't be like this, and it doesn't really make sense. But the big question now is, I think we've learned enough to not doubt this team, but I'm so curious to see what the ceiling is going to be. Been a conversation that we've talked about. Will they make a trade, and will that impact chemistry? And the reason that's what I'll close with thinking about, I thought about, Jonas Valanciunas for Marc Gasol. And I know this Suns team, I'm not saying they're going to sit here and make a run like the Raptors did in 2019, but the Raptors made that deal, JV, homegrown talent, and people thought it might have impacted or disrupted the chemistry, but that was the move that they needed to make to improve in the margins to be a championship team. So beyond the Suns, I'm very curious to see if we see, Detroit make a trade like that. Is it the Spurs make a trade like that since they're ahead of schedule? The Rockets, those teams, because I think the Rockets need to be more aggressive because they're leaning a lot on a 37-year-old. So with 2 weeks to spare before the trade deadline, those are my parting thoughts. Listen, chemistry is important, but at the end of the day, sometimes you got to have guys out there to make plays.
Yeah, and I'm really trying to think off the top of my head right now. Like, have we seen an in-season trade directly turn into a championship since Marc Gasol? I don't think we have, right?
Not to that extent.
Like the 2020 Lakers didn't make any crazy in-season move. Bucks didn't make any crazy in-season move. Warriors didn't make any crazy in-season move.
Nuggets.
Denver, no, that was the roster they stuck with. Boston, pretty much a roster they stuck with. OKC roster they stuck with. So it's rare. Is basically the point I'm trying to make. It's rare that it happens that you make a trade like the Marc Gasol trade and it immediately turns into a championship. And I've said his name a million times on this pod, but like MPJ to me is that caliber player this year that he could swing if he ends up in Detroit or ends up, somewhere where he could like really make an impact and impact winning.
I thought like Tobias for MPJ, that would be crazy. But like that, the chemistry thing for sure with that, but
that's the type of trade though, that like, if they are serious about like trying to capitalize on the window that they have here, like that's the type of move. And I think like Trey Murphy could have been someone like that, but it seems like the Pelicans are kind of just swatting away any sort of offers for Trey Murphy, which, I agree, as they should. He's young and he's playing really good basketball and has an extremely high ceiling. But, that's where kind of going back to what we were saying of like, I don't know how many of those caliber players are going to be out there and available at this year's deadline, but I do think MPJ for me is at the top of the list. of players who could really swing a championship depending on where he ends up if he gets traded.
100% agree. 100% agree. So with that said, we are, at the time you hear this, 13 days away from the NBA trade deadline, which is Thursday, February 5th at 3 p.m. Eastern time, 1 p.m. Mountain time for me, and 12 p.m. Pacific time for you out there on the West Coast. Kyle, I can't wait till we're both on the same time zone. It'll make us planning this stuff very easy. Just wait till daylight savings time is here. Then we'll be all set. We'll be aligned. But that being said, keep it locked in with us here on NBA Sound System Canada. We'll keep you up to date with what's going on the trade market, the Raptors, surprising or not so surprising season, and some of the all-star stuff we'll see. Hopefully Jamal Murray gets his much-deserved first ever all-star selection. For Kyle Irving, my name is Gil McGregor. Thanks again, as always, for tuning into us wherever you get your podcast. Please, if you have not already, subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Instagram. NBA Sound System Canada is the handle on both. We will catch you back here again sooner than you know.